In today's episode, we are creating some vintage-inspired decor using frames from Dollar Tree. And if you can't find these frames, don't worry, I have some other options for you. I hope you enjoy. The detail on the new frames that Dollar Tree is now carrying is absolutely beautiful. I'm going to start by removing all of the insert pieces so that I can take some Waverly Antique Wax and apply this to the entire frame. I'll make sure to get inside all of the crevices and the details on the front. This is going to give it a beautifully aged, distressed look. Look at the difference already between the faux gold sides and where I've already applied the antique wax. Once I've applied this to the entire frame, including the inside edges, I'm going to allow this to dry for several hours. Then I can reinsert all of the back pieces and close the tabs provided. What a difference this made. Look at the before and after just by applying the antique wax. It gives it such a higher end look. To decorate this, I'm using some paper flowers. Now you could also use some artificial flowers. These flowers came from Hobby Lobby. And once I decide exactly which ones I want to use and how I want them to be placed on the backboard, I'm going to attach those using a generous amount of hot glue. I love how the gold in these flowers really plays off of this frame, and you can make this as simple or as ornate as you would like. If you're unable to find one of the decorative frames at Dollar Tree, here is another option. I'm using a 5x7 frame from Dollar Tree with the matte insert in it. I'm going to remove everything from the inside of the frame, and I'm using some of Dollar Tree's stickers. You'll want something with texture. They have a variety of different stickers that you can use for this. I am going to be placing this in the center at the bottom and then wrapping it around to the outside edge. Once I know exactly how much I need to cut off, I can use my scissors to trim that down to size so it will fit the front and the outside edge of the frame. Now the adhesive on the sticker is not going to be strong enough to hold this to the frame, so I'm adding some super glue around all of the edges. Then I could place this back onto the frame and hold it in place using some clamps from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to do that on both sides to hold that until the super glue sets up. I'll repeat that process on the opposite side, and I'm using the larger stickers for this, for the top and the bottom. For the sides, I'm going to use a smaller sticker that's a bit more narrow. Again, I'm going to hold that in place, trim it down to size, add super glue to each side, and then clamp that in place and allow that super glue to set up for about 30 to 45 minutes. Once that has set up, I can remove the clamps. Now my stickers do not match on the sides. The texture doesn't match, and that's okay. And if you have some seepage from the glue underneath, don't worry about that, because we're going to paint this with some black chalk paint, and it's going to give it a little bit of a welded look. I chose a chalk paint to make sure that the paint would adhere well to not only the entirety of the frame, but also the stickers. I'm going to apply one coat and allow that to dry. Using a very small amount of gold leaf rubbing buff, I'm going to dab my finger into that and then pat my finger onto my wax paper to remove most of it. Then I'll gently go over the sticker to bring out all of that texture. I'm also going to go along the edges of the outside of the frame as well as the inside of the frame. Using what's remaining on my finger, I'll take that gold leaf rubbing buff and go over all of the painted portions to blend that in. I'm going to continue to do this over the entire frame. If you happen to get too much rub and buff in one area, like I did here, don't worry. Give it time to set up and then simply go back over that area with your black chalk paint to cover that up. Then I'm using my hair dryer to speed up the drying process. Once that black chalk paint has dried, you can then dab a very little amount on your finger and gently go over that to blend it in, and you'll never know that it was too dark. Now it is time to place some artwork in there. I am going to be printing out on this textured printer paper, and I'll leave a link to that in my description box below if you're interested in it. This is going to give it a very authentic look, but you could also use photo glossy paper or even plain printer paper. I have created a vintage inspired print with a creek and a spring meadow, and this is available on my online store. If you're interested in it, I have that linked in my description box below. The file itself is an 8.5 by 11, which would fit the entire sheet, but I printed mine out as an 8 by 10, and I'm just going to cut right there where the corner is so I can have the majority of the creek in there. I could not decide if I wanted to use the 5 by 7 photo with the mat or without the mat. So I'm going to cut it to the size of the inside of the frame, which is an odd size, so I couldn't resize the picture to fit that. That's why I went ahead and printed the 8 by 10. So that way I can put it into the frame and see if I like it better with or without the mat. For this project, I'm using one of Dollar Tree's wooden crates, as well as some of their wooden snowmen that you can find at Christmas time. You'll need 4 of those. I'm going to flip the tray or crate over to the bottom, and using some super glue, or you could also use wood glue, placing that on the bottom of the snowman, and then adding one to each of the corners. I'm going to hold that in place for a few seconds, let that glue set up, and then allow it about 15 minutes to fully set, and it should be looking something like this. I'm going to paint mine with a chalk paint in the color Sage Shadow. This will take 2 coats. I'm going to paint the entire tray, including the feet. Once that dries, it is going to look something like this. It's going to be a beautiful green color, and I even painted the inside. Now I'm going to take some Waverly's Antique Wax and a dry brush, wipe most of that off on a paper towel, and go over the legs as well as all of the edges on this piece, including the handles and the inside. This is going to give it a gorgeous, distressed, and aged look, like it is an old antique piece. I'm going to be using some wooden flowers. Now this package came from Hobby Lobby, but Dollar Tree does carry some of these wooden cutouts. I'm going to place these on some painter's tape on the sticky side and then tape that down to my mat to hold it in place. This is just going to make it easier for me to apply some antique wax to this and then take a dry paper towel to blend it and lighten it up a bit. Once that dries, I'm then going to take some hot glue and glue one of the flowers in the center on one side of the tray, and then flip it over and glue the other flower on the opposite side. For this project, I'm using one of the wooden plaques from Dollar Tree that has the routed edges to it. I'm going to go over this with some sandpaper to smooth it out and then wipe it down. I'm also using some of Dollar Tree's half pearl stickers. I love that these are all connected so you can make the perfect straight line. I'm going to go along the long edge of the wood plaque. You do want to make sure that you press each individual pearl down to make sure it adheres well to the wood. I'm going to repeat that on the opposite side, and the adhesive on these stickers works really well, so you don't need to add any additional glue. I'm going to complete this by adding it on the other two ends, so it should be looking something like this. I'm going to press them down one last time just to make sure everything adhered well. Before I take some Waverly's Antique Wax, I'm going to start off by going on the outside edges. Now, because that wood is a little bit more rough, it's going to be darker than the rest of the piece. I also made sure to get in between each of those beads, as well as the front, and then I'm going to let that completely dry. Because that is a wax, it's not going to adhere well to those pearl stickers. So I'm going to take some gold leaf rub and buff and tap my finger into that, wipe most of it off, and then gently go over the top of each one of those pearl beads. It is going to give it a beautiful finish, and the gold leaf rub and buff will adhere very well to that. Here's the difference between the gold leaf rub and buff and the other two sides that aren't finished that just had the antique wax. I'm going to complete that on the other two sides and let that gold leaf rub and buff set up completely. I wanted it to have an even more aged look, and I guess I forgot to press record, but I sanded the top of it, and now I'm just wiping the sanding dust off of that. This is just going to give it a really gorgeous dimension in the age between the front and the sides. To finish this piece, I'm using some paper flowers from Hobby Lobby. Again, you could use any type of artificial flowers or even stickers if you like. I'm going to hot glue these in place, and this is how it turned out. Using one of Dollar Tree's decorative frames, I'm going to remove everything so I'm left with just the frame. I'm going to take some black chalk paint, but you could also spray paint this or use an acrylic paint. Just make sure that you get down in between all of the details so the entire frame is covered. Once that's dry, I'm going to take some rub and buff, which you can find at any of your local craft stores. I'm using the color Gold Leaf, but you could choose whichever color you like, and just gently go over all of the raised portions. This is going to bring out that gorgeous design, but still leave the backing in the black color. You don't have to apply any pressure at all. Just gently rub your finger over it, and it's going to bring out the gorgeous detail in this frame. To make sure that the outside and inside edges of the frame go well with the front, I am going to take that gold leaf rub and buff and just sparingly go over all of those sides. I'm not going for full coverage. I still want some of that black to peek through. While that's drying, I'm going to take some white cardstock and one of Dollar Tree's smaller wooden plaques. I really love the shape of this, so I'm going to trace this on the cardstock and cut it out with my scissors. Using some fine grit sandpaper, I can go around some of those jagged edges that the scissors created. I want to use one of Dollar Tree's botanical stamps, as well as one of their ink pads. Now, this was a brand new ink pad, but the ink was dried up, so I spritzed some water on there, let it soak in, and then kind of spread it around on a scrap piece of paper. I'm also using one of Dollar Tree's stamp blocks, but they didn't have any large enough for this botanical stamp, so I am going to place that down and then press firmly, peel that block up, and then press it down on the bottom to make sure that I get my design evenly distributed. Now, the detail on the design is gorgeous, but it's just not dark enough. And I decided that I wanted something a little bit thicker than the cardstock, so I'm just going to sand and paint the original piece that I traced out because I do really love this design. I'm going to paint that with some white acrylic paint and let it dry. And I decided that since the stamp block was not large enough, I'm going to use a piece of glass out of a frame that I already had. So if you do this, just be super, super careful not to cut yourself with that glass frame. And instead of using ink, I'm going to use some black chalk paint and a sponge dauber. I just want to get an even coat on the bottom of that and then just glide it over the bottom of the stamp. I think this is going to give me a darker look that I'm going for than just the ink. Once I have that all spread out, I can just pick the glass paint up, set it it directly on top of the dry paint on the plaque, press firmly, and this came out gorgeous. The color's beautiful. And don't worry about the paint ruining your stamp, because I did wash mine and all the paint came completely off, so you can reuse the stamp. I'm using some green and white striped scrapbook paper from Hobby Lobby. I think this is going to be a beautiful backdrop in our picture frame. So I have traced and cut that down to size, and I'm going to attach it to the smaller portion of the backing of the frame with a good thick layer of Mod Podge, because this scrapbook paper is pretty thick. I'm going to give that time enough to set up, and then I could put this into our gorgeous frame, put the backing back on, and close all of the little tabs. Now I can attach the wooden plaque directly to the backboard of the frame right on top of our scrapbook paper using some super glue. Give that time to set up, and this is how it turned out. I hope you enjoyed today's projects and found tons of inspiration. If you have a favorite, let me know in the comment section down below, because I always love to know which one is your favorite. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Please take care, and I'll see you guys next time.